You know, when you think about soccer, your mind almost immediately goes to Brazil. We're talking about legends like Pelé, Ronaldo, Neymar. I mean, the list is just endless. For decades, their skill, their flair, it has all felt like pure magic. But what if a part of that magic isn't just on the pitch, but is actually hidden deep inside their DNA? Okay, so let's really dig into this. We all know the story, right? The culture, the absolute passion for the game, the endless hours spent on beaches and in the streets. But what if I told you a group of scientists decided to ask a totally different question? Is there some kind of unique genetic signature that actually sets these elite Brazilian players apart from everyone else? To even begin to answer that, we have to go right to the source, to the very building blocks of these athletes. And that's exactly what researchers did. They launched a study to see if they could pinpoint specific genetic patterns in a group of Brazil's most elite soccer players. Now, they didn't just scan the entire human genome. That would be like searching for a needle in a haystack. Instead, they got super focused. They zoomed right in on a select panel of 10 genes, specific bits of DNA that scientists already know are linked to things like athletic power, endurance, and recovery. So let's geek out for a second on what these genes actually do. You've got ACTN3, which is famously tied to the kind of explosive power you see in a world-class striker. Then there's AMPD1, which is absolutely crucial for recovering energy and fighting off fatigue in those nail-biting final minutes of a game. Others are all about metabolism and even keeping muscles stable. Basically, these are the essential tools in an elite athlete's genetic toolbox. Okay, before we get to the really juicy results, there's one quick thing we need to understand. It's called genetic distance, or FST. Just think of it like a score. If two groups have a low score, it means their genes in this specific area are super similar. A high score? Well, that means they're very different. This is the exact tool the scientists use to compare everyone. All right, now for the good stuff, the core findings. The researchers kicked things off by comparing two groups of elite players right there inside Brazil, and what they found was the first clue in a really fascinating puzzle. So, get this. They took a look at the elite players who were under 20 years old and compared their specific performance genes to the seasoned pros. And the result? They were practically identical. Statistically, there was just no real genetic difference between them. And what that tells us is just, wow, whatever genetic advantages these top-tier players have, they're already present by the time they're in their late teens. It seems like the incredibly tough journey to go pro in Brazil filters for these traits at a very young age. Okay, so the young hotshots look just like the pros. That's one thing. But the next question is the really big one. How does this unique genetic profile of Brazilian soccer stars stack up against the rest of the world? This is where the story takes a completely unexpected turn. When you see the data plotted out, it's pretty striking. Imagine a map where being closer together means you're more genetically similar. Well, look at how the two Brazilian player groups are clustered right on top of the European population and really far away from the African and Asian populations. And this is the part that is just wild. Brazil, as we know, is this incredible melting pot with a ton of African ancestry mixed into the general population. But, and this is the key, when you look only at these 10 performance-related genes in these elite athletes, that African ancestry signal seems to just vanish. It's replaced by a really strong similarity to Europeans. The numbers just confirm it. The genetic distance, that FST score we talked about, between the Brazilian players and Europeans is super low. But the distance to African populations, it's significantly high. So what on earth is going on here? Right. How is that even possible? How can a population with so much African heritage produce an elite group of athletes whose performance genes look, well, European? The researchers have a powerful theory that has nothing to do with broad ancestry and everything to do with the sport itself. This quote from the study really gets to the heart of their hypothesis. They're suggesting that these specific genes are under something they call selective pressure. In other words, the intense demands of becoming a top soccer player in Brazil are acting almost like a force of nature. So what does selective pressure actually mean in this case? Well, think of it like this. Over generations, the hyper-competitive world of Brazilian soccer has naturally favored people who happen to have genetic variations linked to things like power, speed, and endurance. So those helpful genes just become more and more common in that elite group of players, no matter what a player's broader family ancestry might be, European, African, or anything else. Now, this science is absolutely fascinating, but it also raises some really important real-world questions, Like, what do we actually do with this kind of information?
And the scientists themselves, the ones who did all this work, are crystal clear on this point. They put out a strong warning saying this research should not be used to screen young athletes or for talent spotting. The risk of misreading the data and unfairly shutting the door on a kid with a dream is just way too high.
Because here's what it all comes down to. An athlete is so much more than a DNA sequence. Genetics might be one tiny piece of the puzzle, sure, but true performance is a masterpiece, built from coaching, nutrition, mental grit, and maybe most importantly of all, sheer passion and hard work. So we circle back to that classic question, is a champion born or made? This study suggests that in the pressure cooker of Brazilian soccer, yeah, maybe certain genetic traits get heavily favored. But it also reminds us that those genes are pretty much useless without the dedication, the culture, and the relentless drive that actually forges a player into a true champion. The answer, it seems, is that a champion is both born and made in this incredible, complex dance between nature and nurture.